Vincent of Collateral and the killer of The Killer are total opposites in terms of appearance and personality. Vincent dresses like the type of guy you wouldn't want your mom to compare you with, and the killer dresses like, well, he wears bucket hats. Vincent can charm anybody in seconds with his charisma and relaxed disposition. The killer removes the bread from his McDonald's sandwich, his worst sin of the film. If these men stood next to each other on some sidewalk in Los Angeles, you would never predict them to have the same occupation. But despite their polar opposite playing styles, Vincent and the killer are both assassins hitting 1,000. And their success is not only a product of skillful marksmanship and calm under pressure, although they possess both. Vincent and the killer rely on a specific philosophy to galvanize their work, the philosophy of nihilism.
That's the why. There's no reason. There's no good reason, there's no bad reason to live or to die.
There's a tendency to observe characters like Vincent and the killer and say, well, they're psychopaths who kill for a living, I wouldn't expect them to be memorizing the Sermon on the Mount in their free time. In other words, the philosophy makes sense given who they are. But what if nihilism is not another well-fitted piece of their persona? What if it's a Tommy Bahama shirt and slip-on shoes, a costume used to conceal the truth? About halfway through The Killer, I thought to myself, this character is like a cross between the aforementioned Vincent and Louis Bloom of the 2014 masterpiece Nightcrawler. Both the killer and Lou Bloom are ruthless in pursuit of their goals, they're hyper-disciplined in their approach, and they almost never blink. At first glance, the killer has far more in common with Louis than he does with Vincent, but after digging a little deeper, we discover that isn't actually the case. When we're first introduced to the killer as he waits for his target like a leopard in tall grass, he delivers an extensive explanation of his worldview. And this monologue is so important to the character that they built the entire teaser trailer around it.
Ask yourself, what's in it for me? Stick to the plan. Empathy, weakness.
The crux of the killer's argument is pretty straightforward, which is why he explains it in 3 to 4 word sentences. Life is meaningless, there is no God, there is no justice. It's a dog-eat-dog world, so I'm gonna do what I want because there's nothing above me to cast judgment. Vincent espouses the identical nihilist philosophy in Collateral after Max the cabbie demands an explanation for his murders.
Max, 6 billion people on the planet, you're getting bent out of shape because of one fat guy.
Well, who was he?
What do you care?
What's interesting in both cases is the extent to which the hitmen depend on these ideas. When Vincent debates Max about the validity of nihilism, he argues like he's done it 1,000,000 times, and he probably has in his own mind, which would imply that Vincent is desperate to ensure that nobody can put a dent in the story he tells himself. The killer never reveals his moral principles to any other character. His encounters are usually pretty brief. He points a gun at someone, they plead their case, he makes a decision. Generally thumbs down. That's it. But his internal dialogue shows a man who's just as desperate to make these ideas the driving force of his actions. Whenever he's faced with a difficult decision, he repeats the rules to himself over and over again. Empathy is weakness, how does this benefit you, and so forth. Now return to Louis Bloom. Just like Vincent and the killer, he must make a number of moral choices on his rise to the top, and every single time he acts in accordance with the killer's rules. He has compassion for no one, every relationship is transactional. People don't recognize this initially because he understands the usefulness of charm and politeness, but by the end of the movie, we see the mask come off.
What if my problem wasn't that I don't understand people, but that I don't like them?
Lou Bloom does not explain his actions to himself or anyone around him. He's a psychopath who takes only his own interests into account and acts accordingly. However, the same cannot be said about our hitmen. Not only do they continually need to recall the beliefs they claim to subscribe to, their own actions contradict them. If the killer truly believed everything in his opening monologue, his story would not be one of revenge. As his associate asks him later in the movie, why aren't you on the other side of the world? You have the resources, you know powerful people are trying to kill you, it would be to your own personal benefit to vanish. But the killer chooses not to disappear because his girlfriend acts contrary to his own rules. She has an opportunity to sell him out and stop the beating, but out of loyalty she protects him at the price of her own suffering. If the killer truly wanted to follow his own rules, he would say, well, thanks for the help, but I gotta bounce. But he doesn't. He repays those responsible for her suffering because he wants to respond in kind to her selflessness, the only way he knows how. The killer will never admit to himself that she's the reason he's doing what he's doing because it contradicts his entire worldview. But she is John Wick's dog, the motivation for his behavior. Vincent also violates his principles during his ride around LA with Max. After his first hit goes wrong, and this parallels a killer situation, Vincent would probably be best served killing Max and starting again with a new cab driver. But he decides to stick with Max, which proves to be a fatal move. Even after Max wins Vincent more time at El Rodeo, Vincent allows him to keep his life. So why does he stay with Max to the very end despite all the trouble he causes? It's a question Max wonders himself. Vincent tries to dodge the question at first, but then concedes that he couldn't bear it out of a sense of pity for Max's wasted life.
Didn't happen. And it never will because you were never going to do it anyway.
The answer is incomplete. Just like the killer, Vincent can't admit the whole truth, which is that he's damaged goods. We see during his visit with Max's mom, which is a deviation he doesn't have to do, that he's determined to make Max feel small. He enjoys feeling like the older, more accomplished sibling. We also learn that Vincent's mother died before he could know her, his father was an alcoholic. Cruz's performance subtly shows Vincent's trauma, especially through the eyes, not many actors can do that, and the subtleties paint a full picture of Vincent. This is not a psychopath. This is a man who forced himself to preach nihilist ideas to numb the pain of his childhood. It turns his mother's death into just another blip in a meaningless existence. So Vincent isn't as confident as he seems to be. He's insecure about many things, but the failures of Max make him feel valuable in comparison. By the time Vincent learns that there's actually more to Max than meets the eye, his fate is sealed. Now, the stories of both characters offer a warning to the audience. If you find yourself constantly trying to prove your beliefs to yourself or to other people, maybe you don't believe them for the reasons you think you do. Maybe they're just psychological flex tape. When the killer lays down at the end of the film and we see his eye twitch, it's an admission, along with his voiceover, that he isn't the nihilist, stone-cold assassin that he wants to be. In the end, he's driven more by heart than head, like the rest of us. Unlike Vincent, we don't get any hints as to why he adopted nihilism, probably for similar reasons: childhood trauma, empathy that wasn't returned in kind. It could be anything, but it didn't naturally follow from psychopathy. Collateral and The Killer are both very entertaining movies, paced extremely well. I don't know why modern directors need to chapter every film, but that's a separate discussion. Overall, The Killer is great, and Collateral has always been one of my favorite movies. There's depth to these characters that can cause us to evaluate our own lives and beliefs, which is what the best characters do, even if the final discoveries are uncomfortable. Alright guys, those are my thoughts on The Killer and Collateral, two remarkably similar stories. If you've watched The Killer recently, let me know what you think in the comments. For some reason, my expectations were not super high, which I cannot justify given the director and lead actor, but I was pleasantly surprised. And I hope many of you felt the same way. But if you enjoyed this video and you want to watch more like it in the future, leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for stopping by, guys. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And God willing, I will talk to you soon.